let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, everyone. We're going to start with a roll call, and then we're going to have approval of minutes, and we're going to switch our student reps correspondence, and we're going to move it up to item number 6 because there's no other item number 6 right after we do the approval of minutes. So with that, let's go.
Mrs. Matlack? Mrs. Neary?
Here.
Mr. Avadia?
Here.
Mrs. Seidel?
Here.
Mrs. Scarbolino? Mrs. Schultz?
Here.
Mrs. Stratton?
Here.
Mrs. Tong?
Here.
Mr. Goodwin?
Here. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Abadia? Second. Mrs. Neary. Any questions or concerns on the minutes? Not. Mrs. Sugars?
We're going to try for the first time to open up our online voting.
Oh, good. Approval minutes.
You want to go ahead and put your vote in?
It's open?
All right,
It work?
we're good. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we can see. All right, cool.
Fancy.
Yeah, everyone like those minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sugars. And now we're gonna go ahead and move to our student reps. And we're gonna start out with Jacob.
Thank you very much. So just this weekend, from this Thursday to Sunday afternoon, Eastside went to DC for the National Scholastic Press Association conference that we go to yearly. At this conference, Eastside won their Most Superior Awards, which is the highest category. Won 4 overall, with Andrew Mayer winning second place in Photojournalist of the Year in the entire nation. So that was a big accomplishment for Eastside. So there were 4 of those. During Spirit Week, we've done food collection, booth painting. There were games during lunch breaks, so that there were 3-point contests, tug of war, pieing teachers and staff, and there were dress-up days, or sometimes there were dress-down days, like in just gray. Oliver Adler won 5th place in the state cross-country meet, and the team won 8th overall, which was a big accomplishment for the cross-country team. They're really hitting their stride. Blood drive occurred about 2 weeks ago, and it was very successful. Vince Papale even visited the famous Eagle. Homecoming dance was last Friday. We had a homecoming king and queen for the first time, which we established homecoming court, which was a big thing for students, and that was Nicole Benson and Sean Cohen, both seniors, obviously. For more senior success, seniors won Powder Puff versus the juniors, which coincidentally happens every single year. Winter sports tryouts have started, so basketball, wrestling, and winter track. And girls wrestling finally has a coach for this new year, so that's a big thing for the girls wrestling team. The student voice survey was given out about 3 weeks ago, and after the results were in, the administration has established student focus groups, which were random sampled from each grade. So they have a 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade focus group. They're selected at random to explain the results and to give them more feedback on what can be done in the future and how to improve the problems they see in the school. One example of this was that a few years ago, they tested they saw different versions of Pride. So administration thought that the Pride was more pep rallies, it was more events, but students really thought that Pride meant a cleaner school, no rats running through the hallway and stuff like that, where mold wasn't growing on the walls. So that was more student pride and administration pride, and because of this survey, because of these focus groups, they were able to kind of reconcile their beliefs and kind of understand how to make the school a better place for students and staff. There's now student choice in day, which was a big thing also in the student survey, which was a study hall change. As a result of that, we saw that students were unsatisfied with the restrictions that they were placed on during their study hall periods, And as a result, Dr. Perry and the administration worked with students to kind of establish study hall that used the annex at Cherry Hill East and the library as two like parallel places to study. And then there's the upcoming East-West football game, which everyone should attend tomorrow. It's going to be a big game, a great game. I hope to see everyone there. And that's about it. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you. And now, Maria from West.
Okay, so for athletic news, most of our fall sports teams have now concluded their seasons, and they all did really well in playoffs. The boys soccer team was in Coaches Cup this year, which was super exciting. And the girls soccer team also made it really far in playoffs. Field hockey got a bye for the first round of playoffs, and for the second round lost to Mainland, unfortunately. Tomorrow, the West Football Lions are going to verse East, which is super exciting. And for miscellaneous, we had our homecoming last Friday. We picked our court, but we don't know our king and queen yet. We will find out tomorrow at the pep rally. Our virtual interns and our pen and medicine interns have continued to go through their rounds. And recently at West, our principals committee opened up with Dr. Malash the new alma mater painting that was done by Noor, which was super nice to do, and it was a really good moment for all the students and for the principals committee. Principals committee has met now twice with the Qualia Institute to talk more about student voice and how we can use our voice in schools, which has been really nice to be a part of and to see all the things, because you don't really think about student voice in the way that they explained it to us. So it was really nice to hear it from a different perspective from people who have been doing it for years and are professional in that field. So that was really cool to sit in on and to do and to listen to. And for art news, our Cherry Hill West did the Matilda musical, which was super cool to watch. It was really good. There was a lot of hard work put into that musical, and it was so nice to see it all come together. And for this past week, we have had Spirit Week. Last night, the seniors, for the third year in a row, won the lip sync competition, which was super exciting to watch. And we continue Spirit Week, and tomorrow we have our pep rally, so that's super exciting to look forward to. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds like some great things happening at both schools there. Next on our agenda, we have Mrs. Wilson. Do you want to introduce? I'm going to turn it to Dr. Malash to introduce Mrs. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Wilson's going to come up to the podium. We are publishing, and we have some sample copies out on the table. Our State of the District booklet. And to go along with the State of the District booklet, Mrs. Wilson's going to do just a brief presentation highlighting some of the information to talk about what's going on here in the district. Again, there were some copies at the back table, and there are copies, paper copies, at each one of the board member spots. After Mrs. Wilson finishes, I will add some follow-up comments.
Yes, good evening. As I said to a couple of people in this room earlier, I told my daughter tonight I was presenting the State of the District, and she said, ugh. And I said, why, ugh? And she said, because it just makes me think of the State of the Union, where the president talks for like an hour and talks on and on. So I promise I won't do that here. Joe, you can go to the first slide. The booklet is very detailed. I'm really doing an overview of what's in that booklet. We'll start with the fact that we are the 11th largest district in the state of New Jersey with 19 schools. Our Barclay Early Childhood Center, 12 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, 3 high schools. As of this October, Val Sadwin in our assessment office was good enough to give me the latest figures. We have 11,004 students and approximately 6,750 families. We are also one of the largest employers in the region with 1,696 employees, and 1,040 of those are teachers and certificated staff. We are a diverse district. Looking at these numbers from the annual New Jersey School Performance Report, it's interesting because since 2016, our Hispanic population has grown from 11% to our current 13%. Our Asian population has grown from 17% to 18%. Our white population has decreased since 2016 from 61% to 57%, and our black population has remained at 8%. And then you can see there the multiracial percentage is 4%, also the same. Our native languages spoken by our students have also decreased. We've gone from 72 native languages to 69, but our number of bilingual students has increased from 2,274 to 2,283, and our number of English language learners also has increased from 383 to 416. When we look at academic achievement, again, this is just an overview. There's more detail in the booklet, but our 2018, class of 2018 graduation rate district-wide was 96%. That outpaces the state, which was at 91%. Our average SAT scores also were higher than the state's. In reading and writing, we were at 576. Math was at 578. State reading and writing was at 542. Math was at 543. We offer 21 AP courses, which is phenomenal when you look at other districts around us. And for our national merit recognition, which we just did at the last board meeting, we had 10 semifinalists and 41 national merit commended students. So we are a national district of character. This picture, this is one of my favorite pictures. This was from our celebration event that we did last November for the kickoff of Character Week, and we live streamed this special event from the Rosa Gym, and we had both of our members of both of our high school marching bands and cheerleading squads there. It was a really fun thing, and everybody in the district got to watch that. So we will be keeping this designation through the year 2023. And we also have many national schools of character, several, as you see, who were designated twice already, which is also a really great achievement. So points of pride in our schools. I think probably one of the biggest ones this year, certainly which culminated after a year of work last year, was our full day kindergarten launch on September 3rd. That was another event that we were able to do a live stream of in video. Very fun and a ribbon cutting, and very, very fun for the adults and the students involved. And it's been great to watch on our social media. A lot of our kindergarten teachers are tweeting and such right now, where we can see what's happening in those classrooms and the expansion of the learning that's going on. Also, Barkley Early Childhood Center's Power Parent Workshop series that they started, our increase in STEM instruction, the Eureka Math Pilot Program, which has been happening in all 12 elementary schools, partnerships and mentorships among students at various grade levels, where our high schoolers are going into the elementary schools, middle schoolers are doing the same, a lot of cross-mentoring going on. Transition Day for 8th graders as they prepare for high school, and student voice initiatives at all grade levels. And points of pride at the district level. We've continued progress in the Cultural Proficiency, Equity, Character Education Committee, which is a district-wide committee featuring all of our principals, a number of other administrators, board members, community volunteers, working every month on that 5-year plan, which is up on the district website. Dr. Malash has continued his town hall meeting series committed to student voice with our high school and middle schools. We've continued our pursuit of fair funding, largely with the Fair Funding for Cherry Hill Schools community group. We held a safety and security forum earlier this year, which was videotaped and is archived on our YouTube channel. And we've continued broadening our communication tools, which was among the board goals. Specifically, one of those that we started in July 2018 that's had great success is the Minute with Dr. Malash series that goes up on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And I've included budget fast facts with this. This was part of Mrs. Sugar's budget presentation, so this is something you've all seen before, but I think it's just worth going over again to see where the budget is allocated. Next. And then looking at our capital reserve projects for this school year, we've got the East Auditorium wall, roofing at West, you've seen all these before, East Masonry wall, security renovations, field improvements, stage accessibility, and our total capital reserve being $9,900,000. And then we talk also about our graduates. For the class of 2019, we had reports out about those planning to begin their careers right after graduation, a number of whom were planning to serve in the military, and then, of course, attending a variety of college and universities. This is not a comprehensive list, but it's a good sampling of where students reported they were planning to attend, and that's also in the booklet. So, at the end of the booklet, you will see mention of what's happening moving forward. We've invited the community in to our research and planning process to address our most pressing needs. This school year, we're carrying out recommendations of the ad hoc committee, and these recommendations include forming and charging a safety and security committee and an alternative funding committee, as well as conducting a series of forums and surveys to help steer the administration and Board of Education as we formulate a new bond referendum. We're encouraging stakeholders to visit the district website and follow us on social media to stay informed about the progress of this important work. And this last slide is just a reminder of our mission statement, which is we shall provide all children with an education that develops open-minded thinkers with the strong academic and interpersonal skills to thrive in an ever-changing world and make it a better place for all. That's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, for putting all that together. Mrs. Wilson has worked with the building principals and has worked with Mrs. Sugars and Mrs. Ridgway and Mrs. Cohen. And a special thanks to the gentlemen and ladies down in the Xerox office for their work and the actual construction of the booklet and what they put together. So what do we do with it next? It'll be online electronically. There are paper copies that we'll have in each one of the buildings. We also share it with our friends in the real estate offices, the folks up at Town Hall, and the library to share information, but it'll be accessible online. So, questions?
I don't have a question, but I did want to just say that this is great results, and I think we should really be proud as a district for where we're at. And I wanted to throw out a tidbit. I shared this with Dr. Malash. I was reading that New Jersey is supposedly the smartest state in the country, number one. And two of the statistics I thought that was interesting is one of the they use for that is the graduation rate at 91% for the state of New Jersey, and we here in Cherry Hill at 96. And the other thing they used was average SAT score of 1090, and I guess we here Cherry Hill are 1154. So I would guess, just my estimation that we're probably the best of the best because we're in the smartest state in the in the union. I'll just toss that out there.
I would agree, Mr. Goodwin. I agree with you. I will tell you one of the things that we do put up there with the graduation rate, there's always a rub that I will have with the graduation rate that we have, and we argue with the Department of Ed every time we get the opportunity to do it. We have a lot of children that stay with us until they're 21, until the June after their 21st birthday because it's an appropriate program. Those children count against our graduation rate, which I just think is inappropriate for the state to penalize a school, an individual high school or a school district for doing the right thing by the children, to stay here beyond the what would be considered a typical 4-year education system. But again, Mrs. Wilson, thank you for your work. Mrs. Sugars and Mrs. Ridgway for the input that you all had in there. Again, a tremendous publication. Well done.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. And next we have correspondence. Do we have any correspondence from anyone? If not, we're going to go to our first public comment section. And for this public comment, you can comment on any items on the agenda. We would just ask that you tell us what item you're speaking to and let us know your name and address, and speak clearly into the microphone if you have any comments.
Good evening. Kim Friedel, 9 Gately Court. the report that Ms. Wilson just gave, I have two questions. Number one, where can I get information about this standards-based math assessment that was given to our 4-year-old students? It's very developmentally inappropriate to be assessing 4-year-olds, so I'd just like to get information on what the assessment is, what we're looking at, et cetera. And my other question is, it says that, I think it says 17% of our students have IEPs and speech only, special education services. Does that number include 504s, or is it just IEPs? I don't know if you can answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Comments?
Ann Einhorn, 1017 Edgemore Road. I just want to thank the Cherry Hill Police Department for working with the students and the staff at West with their donations and the grants, particularly Families Behind the Badge grant and the, the Project Little Warriors, which is a very intriguing program to me. So having just graduated from the first Cherry Hill Academy for Citizens of the Police Department, it was a marvelous opportunity to connect with our police force, and I have seen how much they have really tried to engage our community, particularly our students. So I am very grateful for that in this day and age. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? So, just so you know, you may be aware, but what we try to do is collect all the comments, questions, etc., and at the end, anything that we can answer and address, we'll answer and address at the end. All right. Okay. Our next agenda item. For our next agenda item, we're going to actually move into our action agenda items. And first up, we're going to ask Mrs. Stratton to move the items for curriculum and instruction.
Okay. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. 12.1, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2019-2020 school year. 12.2, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2020-21 school year. 12.3, approval of out-of-district student placements for 2019-2020 school year. And 12.4, action consent to approve curriculum and instruction items 12.1 to 12.3. And hold on. Ask for a second. Seidel, and any questions or comments? Oh, there's an extra. Okay. Come on, tell me this beforehand. Okay. And then additional item. Do I just read the? Yeah. Approval of attendance at conference and workshops 2019-20 school year. Additional item. So do I ask for a second again? Is it to Ms. Seidel? And any questions or comments? Okay, then Ms. Sugars. Great. Oh, we put online? Okay. Oh,
Okay.
So I'm assuming that item moved and was approved?
Yes,
All
I'm sorry,
yeses?
I should
Okay.
mention that, yes.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Mrs. Stratton. Appreciate you standing in for that. Get through those C&I items. Thank you. Next, we have BNF, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Schultz to move the items for BNF, please.
The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, appointment. Number 2, financial reports. Number 3, resolution. Number 4, resolution approving transfer of funds to allow for funding of construction project east-west security renovations. Number 5, resolution for the award of transportation. Number 6, approval of Cherry Hill McKinney Vento DC PNP students going out of district for the 2019-2020 school year. Number 7, resolution for shared services agreements between the Township of Cherry Hill and the Cherry Hill Board of Ed. Number 8, resolution for the award of change orders. And number 9, acceptance of donations. Do I have a second? Mrs. Neary, are there any questions? Mrs. Seidel.
I have a question about the donations. I was wondering if I could just hear a little bit about the Project Little Warriors and the families behind the badge grant that the police department is so generously donating money towards.
So Dr. Morton and the staff at High School West have done quite a bit, honestly being in the forefront in the district with implementation of restorative practices. So some of the monies that they are receiving, they're combining monies that they're receiving from the police department. And again, the money from the families behind the badge grant is a grant that the police department is able to administer. And then there are other monies that they have within their control that they're making the donation. But basically what it is, it supports the program doing training for students in the school. We've done a lot of training with the staff, but provides for some support and training for students where Project Little Warriors is coming in to work with the students directly. And how do you address situations? How do you deal with making choices? How can you make better choices? How do you take ownership and responsibility for the choices that you do make? Dr. Morton had come last June, I think, and presented, or May, and presented to CNI when they originally talked about doing something differently with the restorative practices. There's also a combination of monies that are being used for some of the work that's being done over there through the Title I funding that they receive, because they are a school-wide implementation. So they're able to administer the funds a little bit differently now as well. We certainly will have Dr. Morton come back probably in the spring just to report back to CNI. And then ultimately we'll come up here to the full board, about what they've done and what the program has done. But there's been a great relationship between the police department and High School West. It's a great relationship between the district and the police department. But Chief Monahan and a lot of the men and women in the department have been involved in a lot of activities at West. Everything from running with the cross country and track teams, to the broadcasting department over there has done a lot of videos for the police department. So they've got a really strong relationship. So when they had talked about doing this, they were able to release some funds, to help support them, kind of like I say, move in the forefront for what's being done in the district.
Sorry, one follow-up. Is there any consideration for expanding this to our to East and to the program at Malberg?
There is. So we're doing implementation of restorative practices throughout the district. We will take a look at what happens at High School West this year with this program specifically as almost as a pilot, and then make a determination about the training with the students, or how do we expand that? What does it look like? And who else can be involved moving forward?
Thank you.
Mr. Vadio?
Yep, so just on 13.1, I wanted to, I'd asked some questions by email, but I just wanted to put this resolution to approve a bond council in a context. And I think, Ms. Sugars, were you going to speak to that a little bit?
So we had decided this year, one of our board goals was to take a look at all of our professionals, and we're in the process of doing that. We started early with some of them for various reasons, and we had decided to make a change in bond counsel. We were actually with a firm called Willents, and we decided to make a change to McManaman in Scotland, and the person that we were working with at McManaman in Scotland decided to go work for Willents. So we're back to the original company that we were working with. And so, bond counsel is one of our typical professionals that we have appoint annually. Even when we're not in a referendum process, there's reasons to have bond counsel. In the past, the district has done lease purchases, they've done other types of financing. As we are looking at alternative revenues, I actually have Mr. Salamini coming to our next alternative funding committee meeting to talk about, if you're going to put for instance, if you're going to do naming rights, you have to go through a bid process and some of the different kinds of things that as a district we would have to watch out for as we go through that process. So, bond counsel, whether you're in a referendum process or not, is someone that you generally have at your disposal. And, as we're still fleshing all of this out, we can call and ask them questions about timing. We can call and ask them questions about process. So it's good to have somebody, that you can work with and as you build and as you work towards your ultimate referendum date.
Ms. Sugars, I do have a question. When you go to put the vote up, so I will typically need to abstain on the bill list. How does that work? Can
Just
you-
tell me I will put the voting up, which I'll do right now.
So did anyone have any other
sorry,
questions
James.
before we
Yeah.
moved
Well,
on to voting?
I did want to just kind of highlight one item, and maybe you can talk to it a little bit, Dr. Malash, about the resolution for shared services, because I know we're constantly doing things in terms of trying to share those services with the district, with the township, between the district and the township, and just wanted to highlight that, and maybe you can talk to that a bit.
Sure. So one of the areas that you're going to approve tonight deals with police outside employment, security, traffic control, other police-related duties. There are a lot of events that take place in the district that we have a police presence at. Even with the expansion of our district police department, there are not enough hours in the day or members of our own department to cover all of those events. So we do have a relationship with the township in order to secure their officers as an overtime or an extra duty assignment or detail for them, and we pay them for it, but it's at a specific rate through which we use them. Shared materials and services could be a whole host of things, everything from the tree work that's been done throughout the district to some of the paving work that's done, moving things, that kind of stuff. But we try to take advantage of as much as we possibly can. And again, we have enjoyed a very positive relationship between the school district and local government and the township through the last number of years, which I expect will certainly continue. We all agree that there is one group of people and one pot of money in the township. So the farther that we can stretch what we're able to do and take advantage of supporting each other and sharing things, we don't need to replicate the wheel, and create additional bills. Mrs. Sugars?
And this is a standard agreement that we typically approve every 2 years.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay, so I will put up the voting, and you have a choice. You can either vote no on that item or abstain from that item completely, or if you want, and you want to just tell me which item within the bills list that you want to abstain from, we will notate that when we do the final minutes. So you could do it either way. So I will open the voting. And if anybody has any abstentions they want to share?
I need to abstain to Beata Home Health on the bill list, please.
Okay. Any others? Okay, motion carries.
Thank you, Mrs. Sugars, and thank you, Mrs. Schultz. Next, what? Supposed to show it? Okay. So it's a yes, unanimous. So, next we have our HR, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Tong to move those items for HR, please.
The superintendent recommend I remove the following. 1. Termination of employment certificated. 2. Termination of employment non-certificated. 3. Appointment certificated. 4. Appointments non-certificated. 5. Leave of absence certificated. 6. Leave of absence non-certificated. 7. Assignment salary change non-certificated. 8. Approve of revised job description. 9. First reading of revised policy. 10. Other motions. 11. Action consent to approve human resource and negotiation item number 14.1 to 14.10. And there's additional on the pink sheet. 1. Termination of employment certificated. 2. Termination of employment non-certificated. 3. Appointments certificated. 4. Appointments non-certificated. Do I have a second? Okay, Ms. Shokes. Thank you. Are there any questions? See none, Mrs. Sugar.
Okay, we open the online voting. If there's anyone that needs to abstain from any items, you can let me know. Mrs. Stratton?
14.5.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Mrs. Sugars, and also thank you, Mrs. Tong. Next, we have our P&L agenda items, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Neary to move those, please.
Thank you. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, second reading of policies. Number 2, first reading of policies. Number 3, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying investigation decisions. Do I have a second? Ms. Seidel? Any questions? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Sugars.
Okay. If there is anything that anyone needs to abstain from, you can let me know. Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Sugars, and thank you, Mrs. Neary. Next, we do not have any items to move for the strategic planning. However, we are going to take an opportunity to have a discussion about strategic planning, and I'm going to turn it to Mrs. Seidel to kind of help lead that discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. So you may all recall that back in September, we received the timeline for the ad hoc committee implementation strategies. It is this document, which I believe was recirculated again recently. And I think I have an extra copy if anybody needs it. And so that's where we discussed the various phases of the projects that we'd be undertaking over the next 18 months to 2 years. Then specifically in strategic planning, and in October, November, and through the end of this school year, the committee is discussing and highlighting individual schools. So we thought it was appropriate with the full board to have a discussion for an update on where we are with this implementation strategy and timeline, and see if there's been any changes to those timelines and talk about how this timeline, the work that we're doing in strategic planning all tie together for our overall strategic plan, as well as development of a potential bond referendum. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malash for an update, and then we can ask questions and discuss.
Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. And yes, as you said, I recirculated the spreadsheet basically that Mrs. Sugars presented at the September board meeting that took us back and as we had the discussion about the work that led us into where we are right now. Also to the board, I circulated the document from Judy Wilson, from Mrs. Wilson, who is the person who is facilitating the strategic planning process. So one of the things is there are two things that are occurring. Well, there's lots of things that are occurring, but in terms of strategic planning, there are two things that are occurring along parallel paths. One is the Board of Education has a subcommittee that's called strategic planning that has existed for a number of years. Strategic planning committees exist in some school districts, not necessarily in all school districts. Historically has been in Cherry Hill for a while, but has not been here forever. So that meets every month. And Mrs. Seidel, as you talked about, our focus in that committee has been to go kind of in depth in some specific schools each month to talk about needs of those schools, where we are, and what's being done. The strategic planning process through which we are using Mrs. Wilson as facilitator is a much larger and broader scale look at who we are as a school district, what do we value, and in what direction are we going to go. Mrs. Wilson came in October and spent quite a bit of time doing interviews with all the board members. She did interviews with administrators. She did interviews with teachers. She did focus groups with students. She held two community meetings, one in the morning, one in the evening. And next week we'll be launching a survey that she is working with to gather additional information. The desire for the strategic planning process goes back again to the ad hoc committee from the board that began meeting last winter, after we did the community work, after the failed referendum, that brings us into where we are. In January, we will have a committee that will spend 2 full days, and the committee will be made up of teachers and support staff, administrators, parents, board members, about 30 people or so. And we'll spend 2 full days going through all of this information that Mrs. Wilson has collected through the community meetings, through the surveys, through the interviews that she has done, really to take a look at where are we in terms of teaching and learning and business, buildings and finance, and what direction are we going to go. This isn't necessarily the committee that's going to come out and say, we need to put new screens in this building, or we need to put an addition on this building. But it's the larger scale, really truly that strategic plan of what direction are we going in over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. So there will be additional work that will take place in the spring. After that committee meets, after that group meets for those 2 days, there'll be a report out to the board. We will add it as a standing item in the strategic planning committee, so we can talk about just updates with where we are in that process. But it is a much more global look at who we are as a school district, what we believe works well, and what we believe needs to be done to improve where we are and where we are going.
So, Dr. Malash, one of the questions that I have after you explain that, so in strategic planning, both in October and November, our conversation sort of took a turn towards a consolidation discussion, which we said we were going to table for January. So I wanted to make sure that I understood, because I feel like if I have the question, others on the board might have the same question, as well as those in the community. So how does, for example, that discussion or other similar discussions run parallel to what's happening with the strategic plan? My understanding is that they run parallel, and that we still would move forward with the strategic plan and still be able to have that discussion even while the strategic plan is being developed. That discussion does not have to happen before the strategic plan. I just want to make sure that if you could sort of just explain that a little so that I have it right in my head, that would be great.
Absolutely. So some of it, again, is that big picture discussion, right? It's not about whether we run 19 schools or 20 schools or 17 schools, to go through, but how do we expect our schools to be run? What type of experience do we expect our children to have? What's meaningful? What's important? One of the things when I talk with our teachers, when I talk with our administrators, one of my favorite quotes from John Dewey, who's one of my favorite educational theorists, is what knowledge is of most worth. Right? And that's one of the debates that goes on in education all the time. How do we determine what it is that we teach and what it is that we do? What knowledge is of most worth? So while the strategic planning process that Mrs. Wilson is facilitating is going to talk about how we expect our schools, to look and to feel and what those experiences are going to be like, it's not necessarily going to get in at that point to the hard nuts and bolts of, the most efficient thing would be to have 27 kids in a class. And that we should only run 16 schools or 13 schools. Again, it's that much larger global perspective, much in the sense that, we talk about the Board of Education and the board's role, right? One of the greatest lines that we've ever heard, the presenters from New Jersey School Boards Association to come down is talk about the role of the board. And the role of the board is to say, basically, let there be light. Right, and light so there shall be, but not necessarily to decide how many light bulbs there should be in the room, or who should be changing them, or who should be putting them in. So in one sense, with that strategic planning process, it's that much larger global process to start to, put together an explanation of, well, again, what we believe works well, where we believe we should be going, but not necessarily that concrete piece, which ultimately will come out of those two paths, because at some point those paths will converge.
And I have one more follow-up, and then I'll open it up and stop monopolizing the conversation. When we first discussed this in September, one of the discussions among the board was whether or not these conversations should happen in strategic planning or they should happen as a full board. So, for example, again, going to the topic of consolidation as an example, I'm assuming that we could use an opportunity like this, again, during the strategic planning section, so those conversations can be had as a full board, and they'd be more meaningful as a full board as opposed to in just strategic planning committee. Because if I remember correctly, that was something that was very important to the board in terms of having those conversations as a full group.
Absolutely. Yeah, you as a board can always discuss it during the course of a board meeting, right? As long as y'all are sitting around the table and we're in a public meeting, those discussions can always take place.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Neary?
So I think maybe it's confusion on my part, maybe not. Where does the vision piece tie into this? So you have the strategic plan and you mentioned the how, but then don't we need to back it up and then as a board develop the vision to then go plan the how? Or is that already out there? Like, where am I?
What do you mean by vision, Mrs.
Like
Neary?
the vision for the district, right? So when you say let there be light, have we defined that? Have we said let there be light and then you move forth with the plan? Because maybe we have and I just don't know that, but we haven't talked about that to my knowledge yet.
So we have our board goals laid out. So is that what you mean by vision, or you mean more specifically for like building and facilities and for curriculum?
No, I don't necessarily think it's anything that specific, and if the board goals are that vision, then that would be good to know. I just don't think that that's clear anywhere. So then what our role does become in that process.
Well, I can try and chime in a bit on that. I know that we did talk about the board goals, and we went through that a bit because we said that we had to set the vision or set the goals for the district for this school year. And those are the goals that we're expecting to happen over this school year. In terms of a vision for, I guess you're talking like a long-term vision. Like I know back, a couple of years ago, we had a 2020 vision kind of thing that was used. We did surveys, various surveys that went out, and that was part of what was used in terms of building for the bond that just passed, that didn't pass, I should say, that we had that bond referendum. But in terms of a vision, are you saying like the vision for the next bond? Is that what you're thinking about?
maybe it's broader. Maybe it's like you said, that 2020 vision that I'm thinking of. Like, what is the difference, or is it the same as the goals? That's what I'm trying to understand. So when I understand what the role is for us in that process.
So there's a couple of things. When we did the Cherry Hill 2020 work a few years ago, one of the big things that came out of that was the change in the mission statement. There was a mission statement, there was a vision statement. We went with, at that point, that the board adopted a mission statement and a statement of beliefs. Because we believe this, we believe that certain things should occur. There's certain pieces in terms of vision for the district, and I think, Mrs. Neer, that I understand, so please correct me or tell me if it's making sense. But there are certain things that the district has to do, right, just as a normal operational function. There are things that you as board members are required to do, and we as administrators and running the district are required to do, because they're set down by state statute, right? There's the thorough and efficient education that must be provided to the children that are all of a certain age, that live within a certain area, and all that kind of stuff. So that's there, in terms of what goes on. When we start to talk about some of the specifics about how do we guide what we do, right? Again, it goes back to that Dewey piece. What knowledge is of most worth? How are we educating the children? What value do we place? What value do you as a board place in terms of directing and guiding the direction of a district of, maybe you believe that all children at the elementary level should have world language every day, as a concept, or that children should go to neighborhood schools, is an important concept to go through. But that's more, I think, of where the board fits into that piece. And again, you're representing, the community. You are the voice of the community that's here at the table to make sure that what's being done in the school district meets the needs of the children, that are being educated on a daily basis. And there are certain things like as a public school board, we're never going to say, well, we're going to put out that children don't have to take standardized tests anymore, because you can't do that, right? We can't say that kind of stuff. But we can talk about how do we prepare them, what does that look like? And again, you as the board may want to say, as children are prepared, again, talk about class size, talk about additional supports you can have in buildings, all that kind of stuff. And then you direct, us as the administrative team or the teachers in the buildings, ultimately that goes down to, this is what it should feel like for a child while they're in the classroom, to go through. And I think that's one of the challenges, so when you all as a board adopt goals every summer, those are the big highlight areas, in terms of what are we focusing on and what are we going to talk about and report out on. There certainly is a lot more that goes on a daily basis. It's impossible to encapsulate all of that. But I think the reflective discussion that goes in about what do we value, and again, as we talked about the work that Judy's doing, teaching and learning and business and finance, buildings and finance, finance and facilities, that encapsulating the work in those two primary things, and what do we think that kids should experience while that happens. I don't know if that helps.
It does a little bit. So when you touch upon, do you value neighborhood schools, where, and I'm not saying that specifically as if that's the case, just for example, do we discuss that as the board? Is it just in those discussions, as you said, Lisa, after, as part of just a discussion item?
Yes.
Because I think then if that's the case, we should keep it as a discussion item each time.
Yes, and that is the plan, to keep it as a full board discussion item. And according to this timeline, administration will be ready to support that discussion in January, right? I mean, obviously there's some research that administration has to do in order to be able to answer any questions we have at that discussion. So that, for using that particular topic as an example that I've used a couple times as an example,
Right, that's a good one.
The board will have that preliminary discussion, and I imagine that's more than a one meeting discussion. So we'll continue that discussion until our questions are answered and a direction.
Right, so
or
do you
vision
value
is
that?
set.
Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Is that what we're looking
Exactly.
for? Okay.
Does that help? Okay.
I just want to add one other thing, because the work that is going on, there is a lot of stuff happening, and I know that it would be impossible next to impossible for us all working to be involved in every single thing that's happening. So that's why we have to say, this is what we want to see happen, and then let those things happen. But we definitely will be involved, like even after we pull all the data together, and as part of this 5-year, 6-year strategic plan, we're definitely going to be involved in that, and definitely be involved. Once we have the data, we can actually look at and make decisions and agree on which way we want to go as a district over the next 5-6 years, and that will be eventually become that strategic plan. But it doesn't happen without our input. Right now, I think it's all the information gathering, the surveys, and all that information is being gathered so that we can have the data in front of us to be able to make those kind of decisions. And then we'll also be able to get public input and input from the public, because they'll be able to see that as well, so we can make sure that we're properly representing the public, as well as making sure we're doing our best to meet the needs of the students. So, Ms.
It would be helpful for me. I don't know anybody else, but the way that we do, like the board goals, we rewrite them annually. When we get all the data back from all the various stakeholders, if we could maybe have what is the district's or the administration's input or vision at 5 years, at 10 years, at 15, so that we could perhaps maybe then, as we're having these conversations of consolidation, new versus build, like I think understanding where we're trying to go in 5 years, where we're trying to go in 10, where we're trying to go in 15 might help frame up some of those conversations about some of those decisions that we're going to be discussing. So for me, that would be helpful. Kind of, I mean, obviously it's just maybe a starting point, and that's going to change and flow along the way, but I just kind of understanding the path that we're trying to get to in 5, 10, 15 years would be helpful, because neighborhood schools may be important. And I'm just using this as just an example. I'm going to say that again. This is just an example. But neighborhood schools may be the right thing now. Maybe, you know, if we're really trying to go to STEM, like neighborhood schools may not be, you know, maybe consolidation in a STEM lab may make more sense based on what the district's vision is. So for me, that would be important to know.
So again, I don't want to speak for Dr. Mlash, but I believe that's exactly the plan for the discussion over the winter, right? The typical process is administration brings sort of a recommendation or some ideas to the table, and then we discuss. So just using another example, because we keep using the consolidation example. So also in January, right, just to deflect from that one for a minute, we're also going to be talking about in the winter developing and begin implementation of a multi-year maintenance plan for the district. So that's another example of something that I'm assuming in the winter the administration will bring to us some ideas and thoughts about that, and then we'll have a discussion about that and potentially make changes or agree or disagree or, you know, come to some consensus. So my understanding is that's exactly how this process is intended to work, and that we'll be discussing that during this strategic planning section of our full board meetings, in addition to doing more work in strategic planning, because there's a lot to be done. So, you know, we need to take advantage of all the meetings we can, because again, we don't really have discussions outside of meetings. So, Mr. Abadia.
Just a couple things I'm thinking about that relate to what other people are saying. But the first thing is, I don't know that vision is as complicated as we're making it out to be. You know, we want our kids to get a great education. We want them to be exposed to these opportunities. We want to treat vulnerable populations in a way that supports them. We want to minimize achievement gaps. I don't know. I mean, I think that that's a good discussion to have in public. People can participate in it, but I don't think it's so scary to think about. You know, in 5, 10 years, I want us to get it better on that continuum. Who knows? I think scenario analysis is going to be important as we move through, and what I mean by that is we're either voting for or against something. You know, if we have, let's use a 4 or 3 question model. You know, if you vote yes to one and no to the other 2, it looks like this. It may look like some form of, shall I say, consolidation. You know, it may look like, so I mean, people have to make some kind of choice. I don't think if we go out and it doesn't work again, we can do this every 2 years. At some point we have to make cuts, we have to do something. I don't believe these things would be pleasant, but I think they have to be in some method of reality. If we can't get a bond passed, you know, if we can't, you if we're going out one and it's going to be big and it's a yes or no, no is going to have some very real meaning. I just don't think you can kick this can forever. And so as part of the scenario analysis is, maybe it is 2 middle schools, maybe it is 8 elementary schools. I mean, who knows? But these things have to have meaning because the resources won't be growing on trees. And then I think, of the 2 committees meeting, alternative funding, I mean, what's realistic? Because if we're thinking of that as a big rock, we're going to have to know. So we'll know, let's say in February, at a first pass. So I think that's good. I think testing is important. I mean, I think we keep talking about going back to the ad hoc committee, and though I think there's a lot of value in that, absolutely, as a testing ground, I think there are other testing grounds. I mean, I've mentioned the idea of a live stream question and answer on, Cherry Hill United or whoever. Whatever. I mean, meet people where they are. The information's going to be out there anyway, and I think in one sense, I'd love to see us putting out, some draft plans early and just figuring out what the buttons. I mean, it's one of those things that sometimes, people feel a certain way about certain words, and if we have to cut whatever those words are out to get, a much, the largest share of what we need done. I mean, that can be worked into operations if it needs to be. But I just think the way people, can color certain concepts, we're better off knowing early. And that sensing of social media could be interesting, although, it could go either way. But I just think there's a lot of opportunities like that. One of the things I remember when Lou Greenwald was here is he said, if you want to, fix education in New Jersey, you got to be careful with your sacred cows because, everything has to be on the table. And I know there are a lot of things that could save money or could lower achievement gaps or whatever that will be very unpopular. But I think back to the scenario analysis, let's talk about it. Let's talk about a 9-10 at East and a 11-12 at West. I don't think it's going to be popular. But does it help us do things? Does it save money? Or does it not? I mean, is it really just a horrible idea? But either way, I mean, I think if there are 15 scenarios, we got to explore them. Let's get input on them. But I guess the most serious thing is at the end of it, it's got to be a yes or no will have, I think, a lot of meaning that I think will be uncomfortable, but at least we should know what we're looking at. So as we engage in this.
Thank you. So I don't disagree with any of the things you said. And really, I think for me, having sat on the ad hoc committee, one of the things I learned was that the referendum is just one piece of what the community wants that we heard from the community, God bless you, out of the ad hoc committee. So they want those other pieces, like you said. They want the communication. They want the scenario-based options. So for me anyway, I think this plan lays out a lot of opportunity to have those discussions. So I'm comfortable with this plan. It's just a matter of, in the limited amount of time we have together as a board, how do we best utilize our time to have those discussions? Yes, Ms. Neary.
So quickly looking at the plan, a little bit to Ben's point, but there's like one that says check in periodically with ad hoc to test pathways, and it says timeline September 2020. Is that something we should start to be gauging sooner? Because it doesn't, unless that's the end timeline. Like that's my only concern is it doesn't leave you time to pivot if something goes really sideways.
So I have reached out to the ad hoc committee and asked that, see who wants to still be included in the process. And I feel at this point we probably need to give them another update in terms of where we are in this timeline. We shared the timeline with them. The September 2020 date was really because at that point, hopefully, we will have some idea kind of which direction we're going in terms of project applications. Because if you remember our timeline, we should be doing project applications in August and September of 2020. So, the idea was that at that point we would be sharing project applications, getting some feedback. But I do anticipate that along the way we'll be engaging with them as we go through this process and as we make some decisions about projects, we will be updating them along the way.
Mrs. Sugars, to Mrs. Neary's point about being able to pivot, with how this process has to play out and the rules of the road and how it has to play out, there really isn't much opportunity to pivot, right? I mean, so that's why you have to put in all of this hard work up front and try and do all this data gathering up front, because once the project applications are in, there isn't necessarily time or room to pivot a lot.
Well, and again, if you look at how we put this timeline together, we literally said, this is phase one, this is phase two, this is phase three, and you're right, there really isn't time because we feel that we need to give the state additional time to review everything so that we don't run into the same problem that we did last time. We talk about a March 2021 referendum potentially, which sounds like it's really far away, but when you break it down, it really isn't. So to Mrs. Neary's point and to your point, yes, we're probably going to have to engage them along the way in order to make sure we're getting the feedback before we are putting in project applications.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment and just want to make sure we're all on the same page. My understanding is that we should plan on having a discussion about our strategic plan, whether there's items to move or not, every meeting. So whether there's items to move or not, then there'll just be another piece that we can be discussing, or piece that may have happened that we can be reviewing. But every meeting, we should plan on having some discussion around that. Is that?
Yep, I know I would agree. I see everybody nodding their heads. That's what the board discussed in detail in September. So I believe that's still everyone's wish. Okay. All right, I'm done. Sorry, back to you, Mr. Goodwin.
All right, great. Pull up my agenda here, and I believe the next item is our second public comment. You can comment on any item you like, whether it's on the agenda or not. And you have 3 minutes to speak. The timer's up there, and just ask that you speak your name and address and to clearly and whatever you'd like to speak about.
Hi, Rosie Arroyo, 105 Forest Road. Just really comments. I love some of the points in the report about just some of the things that you're looking forward to do in the district. Loved your report out and student voice, which is very important to me. I did want to give a little bit more background on the Project Little Warriors. Part of that program is funded by the Camden County Youth Services Commission. 3 years ago, we had a discussion with Joe and the police department in separate occasions to talk about what ways we can bring law enforcement and schools together to develop more restorative practices. And I'm really excited that it's actually going through because it's been 3 years in the making. I'm like so excited because it's like really like a strategic plan that's coming into fruition. Part of that work is also to focus on developing larger restorative justice hubs in our community. And we picked specific communities, Cherry Hill one of them, because of the size of the community and also because the support and the leadership behind it. So we're hoping that this model can be developed and implemented in other locations. But we will be tracking as the commission the outcomes on specific performance measures, and we'll be more than happy to share with you, all of you. It is a small portion of the funding going to the police department for that project, but again, I'm glad that that's going forward. With that said, March 19th, 2020 is the Camden County Youth Services Commission Students United for Respect and Equity Shore Summit. It'll be our 4th annual. Last year, Cherry Hill, East and West sent about 46 students to the summit. This year, we look to have, we're looking to get someone that was on American Idol to be our keynote speaker, trying to confirm dates. But we are hoping that Cherry Hill will send students again, and you'll be receiving an invitation from the Youth Services Commission Chair, within the next couple of days, probably after the break. But we hope again that transportation is available. We'll be busing and picking up students there. But I mentioned that because the young lady mentioned student voice, and we are looking for students to do presentations and workshops at the Youth Summit this year. So if you have student groups in your district that would be excited to participate and plan and do a workshop for their peers, that's something they feel like is important, that they share that so that we can work together and put that into the day's event. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Podowitz, 110 Kilburn Drive, Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I was notified that you're gonna the testimony of Sharon Joshua. You may have it, put it up. Please read it because it shows the way we've been cheated at least since 1990, where our aid was actually cut by about $10 million from 89-90. For the next 5 or 6 years, it would total of $10 million. And now we go to SFRA, which was something that Sharon Joshua was pleading about, something like that was supposed to help us, and of course it didn't at all. Just to give you an idea, and I mentioned things before, our equalized valuation in 2007, which was around the beginning of SFRA, was $9,954,618,292. So almost $10 billion. Our equalized valuation now is $8.7 billion. So our actually equalized valuation has actually decreased about 1.3, and that's important to the formula. However, according to S2, and I think we need to be with the group that challenges it, right now our uncapped aid is $25.9 million. We don't get that, but that's the aid we're shooting for, which back in the beginning of SFRA, our uncapped aid was supposed to be $29.5 million, but we only got $17 million. But the key is that our uncapped aid by formula has actually decreased $4 million, while our equalized valuation has decreased too. Now, it should be inverse. If your equalized valuation decreases, then we should be getting more aid, not less. But the way they've modified the formula, the way the legislature has, and when we're dealing with S2, it actually is less. Now, what's even worse is we've increased, we now have full-day kindergarten, which means we should be getting a little bit more money just by the numbers, because we don't have half a day, we have full day. And I know someone came up and figured it out, that it was about $300,000. I don't know if we ever got that $300,000 extra. By statute, we should have, but we didn't. And it's because, remember, it's not the number of kids, it's how they classified the kids as half day versus full day. And they're still classifying our kids in kindergarten as half day. And again, someone said it was like $300,000 at the time. That's what you figured out, if I remember. So what happened with that money? I mean, we're being cheated enough anyway.
Yoni Yaris, 329 Cherry Hill Boulevard. I'm going to start from the bottom. I'm a little concerned for a Board of Education member to mention utilizing a closed group on Facebook that has blatantly attacked the district on multiple occasions with serious misinformation, starting with the bond last year through the food incident and such. So for a board member to get up here, I think it's a serious close to violating F in terms of the school board ethics. So I'd ask Mr. Green to look into that and futurely advise board members to avoid doing that. Which basically speaks to special political interests and political groups, and I think we all in this room can agree Cherry Hill United is a political group and a special interest group, at least in terms of context. I was curious if we're going to release the names for the members of the 2 ad hoc committees, just so we can be aware of that. I was also curious about when we're planning on getting the demometer information, because I think that will help a lot in terms of the strategic planning process to know where we're heading in the next 1 year, 5 years, and more. And hopefully the township will eventually get a master plan in place along with that, because I'm sure that will be helpful as well. I also had an interesting thing that came up today at the Cultural Diversity Committee meeting. We were talking about names of schools and how I didn't know until today that Russell Knight was actually a former superintendent of the district. So I think it'd be really important during this process to get the history out there. I'm not sure that many people know that Rosa is named after the former principal of Rosa, and then John Carusi obviously being named after Mr. Carusi as well, so that we can start looking at our history. And also when it comes to this school, for the alternative high school, is if they can get an official name. I think it is hurtful to the students that they be referred to constantly as the alternative high school. Referring to as Malberg refers to a now extinct elementary school, not a high school, despite the sign out there that still exists saying this is an elementary school building. So just to talk about that going forward. And then reading through the report tonight that Mrs. Wilson and team put together, if we can define the acronyms in there a couple times, they're not put out there, and for the digital version to link out to the school websites as well, because the nice part about being digital is you can make hyperlinks and make it really user-friendly that way. And then the last thing is if we could add an agenda item for when Dr. Malash or Mr. Goodwin does make comments following public comment, that as necessary or something like that. And one final one is for the new votes. You can't see the votes screen that comes up when you're watching from the live stream at home. So if there's a way to better do that or put out an explanation, here's a guide how to view it using the board document, just to communicate, saying that we're going paper-free. Here's how you can see who voted for what as you're watching from home and things like that. It's nice to be paper-free and be on a screen. It's cool seeing it here, and also to utilize the two screens in the back of the room, because this screen up front is a little small to see. So thanks.
Any other comments?
Kim Friedel, 9 Gately Court. Dr. Malash and Mrs. Sugars, back when Commissioner Repollet came to visit the district, at the meeting afterwards, Assemblyman Greenwald talked about a statewide bond for facilities. And I know that you have an opportunity to meet with him. I'm just curious, as we're thinking about our bond, if he is actually intending to put forth such a statewide bond, and if we're taking that into account as we're doing our strategic planning.
Any other items? Any other comments? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn it to Dr. Malash to address as many of the items as he can, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. I'm also going to make a couple of comments at the end. I didn't realize as we went through and prepared the agenda, we forgot to list superintendent's comments on this agenda. I've been sitting here quietly, well, not quietly, completely. I have talked quite a bit. But I will make some comments
apologies,
at the
Dr.
end.
Malash.
No, it's not, you would think that I would look for that first, Mrs. Sugars. Or some may think that I would look for that first. No, I have not heard anything from the Assemblyman about doing another bond through the state for facilities at all. In fact, we still don't know, the money that was approved last year, more than a year ago now. We still don't know how we can access that. Mrs. Sugars and I talk about that pretty regularly. That goes through. So no, as of now, that has not come forward. The actual name of the Cherry Hill Alternative High School is the Coles Alternative Program. We refer to it as the Alternative High School. It actually has a testing number as the Alternative High School through the state, but it's the Coles Alternative Program. The children who are enrolled in the Coles Alternative Program remain students at High School East and at High School West. So it remains the Estelle Malberg Administration Building. We refer to it as the Alternative High School, but the formal name is the Coles Alternative Program that's there. I did tell Dr. Potowitz when I saw him out in the hallway prior to the meeting that Mrs. Giaccio's testimony that is referred to, Mrs. Wilson has secured a suitable copy electronically of it, so we will get that posted on our website early next week. Since we are closed at the end of this week, we'll continue to look at the numbers that are there as well. We are excited, Ms. Arroyo talked about Project Little Warriors. We are excited to continue to work with them and expand what that work looks like, and to be able to pay them to come in to do that training. We will have children participate for sure in the summit again, to go in. It's a wonderful experience for our kids and for the staff members who are able to go. The percentage of special ed that's in that document does not include 504. We'll follow up and find out exactly what that is. Questions, certainly I would encourage you, Ms. Friedel, to follow up with Dr. Mahan. She can follow up with Mrs. Rockhill. One of the misnomers about assessment, so we as educators, we constantly assess, right? Assessing and then actually defining what that looks like, I think is part of what that discussion is, to go in. We're incredibly proud of the Berkeley Early Childhood Program. In fact, Mrs. Rockhill and the staff worked with the early childhood folks through the Department of Ed last year for sure, Mrs. Wellington, for the majority of the year, doing trainings and going out and seeing other schools and that kind of stuff. So they've been intimately involved programmatically with what's going on. I think that's really the big things with right now. And I would echo Ms. Einhorn again. I agree with you. Thank you to the police department for making the donations and for the relationships they have. One of the other big programs and projects that the police department continues to do with us in the district is they are very involved in Bookmates at Johnson Elementary School, where men and women from the force go in and read with kids in the school. It's a phenomenal program. Yes, if we have not put out that, thank you, Mr. Goodwin, if we have not put out the names of the folks that are on the Safety and Security Committee and that are on the Alternative Funding Committee, we will put those out because we let folks know for sure that was part of what we were going to do when they applied to be on there. So if that's not out there somewhere, we'll get that up the next week because we have our next meetings are coming up, not next week, Mrs. Sugars, the following week, yes? The 10th and the 12th. To go through. So just a couple of final comments as we go into Thanksgiving weekend. Tomorrow, as the kids talked about, tomorrow is the homecoming game over at the stadium at High School West. It begins at 6 o'clock. According to the last weather report that I saw, it's supposed to be relatively mild, maybe breezy, but should be dry. I encourage folks to come out to see it. I was very pleased this morning. Dr. Smith and I were over at High School West. Mr. Brow, who's our director of athletics, and the staff, the secretaries in his office, as well as the staff of the two high schools, they put on a homecoming breakfast. Last year it was hosted at High School East. This year it was hosted at High School West, and it's able to celebrate the seniors from the football team, the cheer team, and from the marching band. It's a wonderful opportunity to bring kids together from both of the high schools to recognize the kids. There were a number of parents that were there. Just a wonderful morning, and one of the things that's so important and that it always strikes me about the homecoming, because we are honestly one of the last in this area to continue to do it traditionally around Thanksgiving. We moved it to Wednesday night about 10 years ago, but it really does bring people out. Tomorrow night at the game, we will see people that have graduated, from one of our high schools back into the 1960s, all the way back into the 1950s. We have had people that have been out there, and certainly kids that graduated in 2019. But it truly is a community event, and it is one of the celebratory times to bring people together. The football teams always work incredibly hard out on the field, regardless of what else goes on during the season. That game is a defining moment for those young men while they are out there. The cheer teams, the marching bands, it's great to see them perform. The homecoming courts, it really is one of the few traditions that we have continued to maintain in the school district and in our community. So I encourage folks to come out and to see it and to be a part of that. There are wonderful events this time of year, winter concerts that are coming up, especially at our secondary schools. All of the high school winter concerts are taking place at High School West because of the work that's going on in the auditorium at High School East, as well as their fall play that'll be coming up, not next weekend, but the following weekend. Please check the website, follow along in the e-news that we put out. We push out as much information as we can, but I encourage you to go out and see the high school concerts, see the high school shows, see the middle school concerts. You'll be incredibly impressed. As a building, we welcome the band and one of the vocal groups or two of the vocal groups from Beck come over here and play for the staff in the building every year, and it's an incredible experience. to be able to see the talent of these middle school kids, that perform for the folks that work in this building. And it's the same thing, it just raises the level when you go and see the high school kids. I would put the concerts up against, and the plays, honestly, up against anything that you will see spending a whole lot more money going over to Philadelphia to see a show or to see a concert. Truly take advantage of what goes on here in Cherry Hill. But this is a wonderful time of year. It's also a time of year where we have many families who are in need. There's a lot of drives that go on to help support those families, which is tremendous. Our Zone PTA does one of the largest ones, that's in our community. We always try to remind folks that as they're doing that, always to remember one of the hardest times for folks is, after the first of the year, February and March and into April, and what that looks like as well. So I'm grateful for, so many wonderful people. I hope that everybody has a nice and a healthy and a relaxing Thanksgiving. Take some time just to breathe. Spend time with your children, spend time with your family. I have one article that I like a lot. I like both of the ones that I will send to the board tomorrow night, but one is just about balance and where we are in our lives. Everybody needs balance. So healthy and happy.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. Those are all our items for tonight. Definitely want to echo what Dr. Malash said, and I wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. And want to have a motion to adjourn. Okay, Mr. Avadia, Mrs. Seidel. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.